I remember the ground before I remember the pain. Cold gravel pressed into my palms. My knees burned. And for a moment, I couldn't understand why the sky was spinning above me, or why the night air tasted like metal in the back of my throat. Then I heard the car door slam. Hard. Final. Like a judge's gavel. Brad's voice cut through the dark. "You're done." That's all he said. No anger. No hesitation. No shame. Just those two words, tossed over his shoulder as if he were closing a chapter he'd already rewritten in his mind. I didn't even have time to sit up before the red glow of his taillights smeared across the road. They blurred, doubled, and then disappeared as the car sped away. My own son. The child I raised with gentle hands and long nights and every ounce of patience I had left in my bones, had left me on the side of a back road like a piece of trash he no longer had a use for. My handbag lay a few feet away, upside down, spilled open like a wound. A bottle of pills rolled toward the ditch. My scarf had torn. And there, face down in the dirt, was a photo of me holding him on his first day of school, the one I kept in my wallet for 30 years. I reached for it with shaking fingers, but my chest tightened before I could pick it up. Not from the fall. From shame. A deep, suffocating shame that made me want to disappear into the cold grass. "Get up, Claudia," I whispered to myself. "Please, just get up." But my legs wouldn't move. Cars rushed by, their lights flashing across my face without slowing. No one knew that a mother was lying there, whispered away by the person she'd loved most. No one knew that betrayal could look so quiet, so ordinary, under the right stretch of moonless sky. Then I heard a different kind of engine. Lower. Heavier. Slowing down. Blue and red lights bled across the asphalt. A police cruiser rolled to a stop. An officer's door swung open. I heard footsteps running toward me, gravel crunching in quick, sharp bursts. A flashlight steadied on my face. "Ma'am," an officer's voice said, breathless but calm, "don't move. We've got you. And we've seen the footage." The footage. Those words would change everything. But right then, as I lay on that cold road, all I could think was this: how long has my own son been practicing the moment he'd finally let me go? But the story didn't begin on that road. It began on a Sunday, when my seat disappeared. Before we go on, tell me where you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories coming soon. Sundays used to be my favorite days. They were simple, predictable, gentle, the kind of days that reminded me I still had a place in my own family. That morning, the sunlight slipped through my kitchen window just right, warming the counter where I kneaded biscuit dough the way my mother taught me. I hummed without thinking. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and fresh rolls. For a little while, I convinced myself that this Sunday would feel like the old ones. By noon, Brad and Heather arrived with Calla and Logan bouncing in ahead of them. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened my arms wide. Logan hugged me first, quick and tight. Kayla gave a small smile, the kind that said she noticed more than she wanted to say. "Smells good, Mom," Brad said, kissing my cheek without really looking at me. Heather walked straight to the dining room. "Let's make sure everyone has a place," she said lightly, already shifting plates. She moved with the confidence of someone who had decided the house needed her direction. When we finally sat down, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: my seat at the head of the table was gone. Brad sat there instead, carving the chicken as if he'd always done it. My place was now at the corner. I told myself it didn't matter. It was only a chair. But the feeling settled heavy anyway. We ate. We talked about school projects, work deadlines, church events. Everything sounded normal, but underneath it, something tugged at me, a quiet wrongness I couldn't name yet. As I carried empty plates to the sink, I heard Heather whisper to Brad, "Once the house is in our name, we can finally move forward." The dish nearly slipped from my hand. I pretended not to hear. But the words lodged themselves deep, like a small stone in the quiet water of my chest, waiting for the ripples that would come. After lunch, we moved to the living room, the way we always did. The kids settled onto the rug with a puzzle, Heather scrolled through her phone, and Brad leaned back on the sofa like he owned the place. I poured sweet tea for everyone, trying to shake off the unease from the dining table. But before I could even sit down, Brad cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, "we should talk about Dad's will again." My heart stumbled a little. "What about it?" He exchanged a look with Heather, the kind of look two people share when they've already had the real conversation without you. "We're trying to plan ahead," he said. "For the family. For the kids' future. You know Dad wanted the house to go to us eventually." I stood there holding the picture, the cold sweating down my wrist. "Your father and I talked about many things," I said quietly. "But we agreed I'd stay here as long as I needed." Heather jumped in before he could answer. "Of course, Claudia. You'll always have a place with us. But remember the updated version?" The lawyer explained everything. It made things simpler. I blinked. "Updated version?" "Yes," Brad insisted. "The one Dad signed near the end. We all agreed on it." His tone sharpened just slightly on all, as if I had been present for a meeting I'd somehow forgotten. But I had never seen another will. Not a draft. Not a discussion. Nothing. For a moment, shame and confusion tangled inside me. Was my memory slipping? Had grief blurred something important? Kayla looked up from the puzzle then, just 1 second, just long enough, and I saw it. The flicker of discomfort. The way she glanced at her parents as if she knew they were pushing too hard. That flicker told me what my heart didn't want to believe. Something wasn't right. And whatever that updated will was, it wasn't written for my benefit. As Brad kept talking about that updated will, my mind drifted, uninvited, back to the day we buried my husband. Grief has a way of smudging the edges of memory, but some moments stay sharp, like glass you never quite managed to sweep up. I remember standing at the entrance of the church, holding a tissue that had already fallen apart in my hand. People came in waves, offering hugs, murmuring, "He was such a good man, and we're praying for you." But after a while, the hugs weren't for me. They were for Brad and Heather. They stood front and center, greeting everyone as though they were the ones who had spent 30 years beside him. I don't think they meant to push me aside. But they did. When it was time for the slideshow, I took a seat in the second pew, clutching my purse like a lifeline. The lights dimmed. Photos flickered across the screen, birthdays, fishing trips, holiday gatherings. But one thing struck me, I wasn't in most of them. And when I did appear, it was in the corner of a frame, half-turned, or blurred, as if I were a background detail to my own life. Heather sat beside me, whispering, "I thought these were the best ones," with a smile that was perfectly polite and perfectly empty. Then came Brad's speech. He talked about his father's strength, his guidance, how he stepped up to support the family after the illness. He painted himself as the backbone. The caretaker. The one who kept everything afloat. I sat there, stunned, as he rewrote our story in real time. No mention of the nightly vigils I kept at the hospital. No mention of cooking meals, paying bills, wiping tears, his and mine. In that moment, I felt the first prick of erasure. A tiny sting, ignored too easily. Looking back, that was the beginning. A quiet warning of the storm that was coming. In the days after that Sunday lunch, little things began to shift, quietly at first, like the settling of a house before a storm. Brad called me more often, but not to talk. Not to ask how I was feeling, or if I needed anything. His voice had a new edge, a hurried impatience that made me brace myself every time the phone rang. "Mom, you shouldn't be driving so much," he said one morning. "That clinic is too far. Let me take you next time." "I'm fine," I replied. "I've been going there for years." "Still," he said, with a sigh that made me feel foolish for standing up for myself, "Heather and I think it's time you consider something smaller. Something easier to manage. Something smaller. Something easier." He said it like kindness, but it pressed against my chest like a weight. A few days later, he showed up unannounced. He walked through the house slowly, hands in his pockets, frowning at the photos on the walls, the Afghan draped over the couch, the stack of gardening magazines on the coffee table. "This place is dated," he murmured. It's my home, I said softly. I know, he replied, patting my shoulder as if I were a child refusing to understand. But you're getting older. It's time to think about the bigger picture. We can help you. You just need to trust us. That word, trust, stung. For years, I had been the one helping him. I co-signed his first car loan. I watched the kids anytime they needed. I covered bills when his job fell through. But now, somehow, I had become the burden. The inconvenience. The problem no one wanted to say out loud. He left that afternoon with a list of simple adjustments we'd talk about later. I stood in my living room after the door closed, feeling the air settle in his absence. Something wasn't right. And I knew it was only the beginning. Brad showed up the next morning with a confidence that felt rehearsed. He didn't even sit down. Mom, we need to run a quick errand, he said, jingling his car keys. It'll make things easier for everyone. I hesitated. Something in my stomach tightened. What errand? Just paperwork, he said. A small home equity line for emergencies, nothing scary. Just in case. Come on, let's go before the bank gets busy. The bank. I hadn't planned on going anywhere, but he stood there waiting, eyes fixed on me with that impatient son-to-parent stare that makes you feel unreasonable even when you're not. So I grabbed my purse and followed him. At the branch, a young woman with a warm smile approached us. Good morning. I'm Ms. Hannah Park. How can I help you today? Brad stepped forward before I could open my mouth. We're opening a small home equity line tied to her house. Just routine. She already agreed. Ms. Park looked at me instead of him, something I appreciated more than she knew. Is that correct, Ms. Jenkins? Yes, I said, though the word felt uncertain leaving my lips. I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want to disappoint my own son. That's the trap so many of us fall into, mistaking silence for harmony. We sat down at her desk. Papers slid toward me. Brad stood behind me, hands on the back of my chair like a guard. Every time I paused to read something, he nudged my shoulder softly. It's fine, Mom. Just sign. It's standard. Ms. Park's brow creased. She asked gently, would you like me to explain anything in simpler terms before you sign these documents? Oh, she understands, Brad cut in quickly. We've gone over this. But we hadn't. Not once. Still, with both of them watching, I picked up the pen. I signed where he pointed, my signature shaking slightly on the last line. As we walked out, Ms. Park called after me, if you have any questions later, please come back. Her voice was kind and uneasy. For the first time, I wondered what exactly I had just given away. A few days after the bank visit, Heather came by just to help tidy up. That's what she said, standing on my porch with a bright smile and a bag of scented candles hanging from her wrist. I didn't have the heart to turn her away. I never did. Oh, Claudia, she said as she walked in, giving the living room a quick scan. You always keep things so cozy. But you know, with everything coming up, we should think about making the house more modern. Modern? I repeated, unsure what she meant. She didn't answer directly. She moved through the room like she'd rehearsed it, picking up picture frames, studying them, and placing them face down on the coffee table. My wedding photo. Brad's graduation picture. The family portrait we took on our last vacation before my husband's health declined. These can go into storage for now, she said gently. Less clutter. Clean lines sell better. Sell. That word echoed in my mind like a dropped coin rolling across a church floor. Before I could respond, she was already in the hallway, removing the embroidered wall hanging my mother made decades ago. We'll replace this with something more neutral. Buyers want to imagine themselves in the space. Buyers. I stood there frozen as she boxed up pieces of my life, my memories, as if they were outdated decorations. When she reached the kitchen, she paused at the fridge. Oh, perfect, she said, pulling out a sleek, laminated planning board. She stuck it on the door with a firm click. The first words written on it in bold marker, future, sell, invest, profits, upgrade the kids' schools. My name wasn't on the board. Neither was my life. Later, when she finally left, the house felt colder. Echoing. Like it was slowly being taken away from me, while I was still standing inside it. That weekend, our church held a fundraiser for the youth program. Heather had been helping the youth board for weeks, showing up with spreadsheets and a smile, talking about future funding like it was already decided. I baked 2 pans of cornbread and a peach cobbler, the way I always had. Church was my safe place, or at least, it used to be. I walked in expecting the familiar warmth, the kind that wraps around you like a soft shawl. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt something shift. People smiled at me, yes, but their eyes slid past me almost immediately, settling instead on Brad and Heather standing near the front. They looked polished, confident, glowing under the soft lights as if the space belonged to them. Pastor Charles took the microphone to thank volunteers. I clapped politely until I heard my last name, spoken with a tone that made my stomach drop. And a big thank you to Brad and Heather Jenkins, he said, for generously offering their family property as collateral for future youth projects. A true blessing. The room applauded. Loudly. I froze. Family property? Collateral? Offered? I hadn't offered anything. Before I could think, I stood up. My hands were trembling, but my voice tried to steady itself. Pastor, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Heather appeared at my side so quickly I didn't even see her coming. Her hand wrapped around my arm, firm but disguised as supportive. She leaned in and whispered, "Not now, Claudia. People are watching. Don't get confused." Confused. That word stung more than the grip on my arm. Everyone kept clapping. No one looked concerned. No one asked what I meant. It was as if the moment I opened my mouth, the whole room collectively decided not to hear me. I sat back down, my heart tight, my cheeks burning with a humiliation I couldn't hide. Later, when no one was looking, I slipped out the back door into the cool evening air. I didn't cry yet. But something inside me cracked, small, sharp, and deep. I didn't sleep that night after the fundraiser. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that room full of clapping hands and polite smiles, swallowing my voice whole. By morning, I felt hollowed out. Still, I told myself not to make assumptions. Maybe Brad didn't know what Pastor Charles was going to say. Maybe Heather misunderstood something. But when Brad showed up that afternoon, I realized I had been comforting myself with lies. He came in without knocking. "We need to talk," he said, his tone clipped, like I had inconvenienced him. I stood at the sink drying a mug. "Brad, why did Pastor Charles say you offered the house as collateral?" He didn't flinch. "Because it's the responsible thing to do. You weren't using the equity, and the church needs support." My hands went cold. "You had no right. That's my home." He scoffed. "Mom, don't do this. You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" My voice broke then, sharp and shaky. "You made decisions about my property behind my back." He folded his arms, jaw tightening. "I'm trying to help you. You've been struggling. You forget things. You sign things without understanding. I can't keep cleaning up after you." The words hit me like slaps. "I forget things?" I whispered. "What things?" He shrugged with practiced frustration. "Appointments. Bills. Simple stuff. Heather and I have been patient, but you can't keep living like this. We need control so we can manage the house properly." There it was. The truth he'd been circling for weeks. Control. "I never agreed to that," I said, forcing the words out. Brad's expression hardened. "You already did. At the bank. You signed the forms. I told you we were updating access." My breath caught. My mind scrambled back to that desk, the nudges, the rushed explanations. "Brad," I said, voice trembling, "I didn't know." He cut me off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Mom. Stop. You're making this harder than it needs to be." And for the first time, I saw something in my son's eyes I had never seen before. A coldness. A calculation. A certainty that he was already winning. Brad didn't call for 3 days after that argument. The silence sat in my house like an unwanted guest, following me from room to room. I tried to keep myself busy, watering the garden, folding laundry, rereading old letters from my husband, but every task felt heavier, as if my hands were moving through thick fog. Then, just as the sun dipped down on the third evening, Brad pulled into my driveway. No warning. No softening smile. Just a knock on the door sharp enough to make me flinch. "Mom," he said when I opened it. "Let's go for a drive. We need to clear the air." Everything inside me tightened. "Can't we talk here?" "No," he said, stepping aside to let me pass, as if the decision had already been made. "It'll be easier if we're not distracted." Distracted. He meant Barbara, my neighbor, who often peeked out when he visited. He meant the walls of my home, the ones that still held pieces of me he couldn't box up. I grabbed my coat slowly, buying a few seconds. My phone was at 8% battery, blinking red. For a moment I considered plugging it in, but Brad was already walking toward his car. The night air felt colder than it should have as I climbed into the passenger seat. The car smelled like fast food wrappers and the cologne Brad used to drown out stress. He didn't look at me before pulling out of the driveway. We took a route I didn't recognize, past the closed shops, past the old mill, past the last street lamp. Each turn felt deliberate, chosen. The road grew darker, emptier. "Brad," I said softly, "where are we going?" He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. "Somewhere we can talk," he said. But his voice was too calm. Too steady. Too sure. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't a conversation. It was a setup. The road narrowed until it was nothing more than a strip of cracked asphalt between fields. No houses. No streetlights. Just the hum of the engine and the pounding of my own heart. Brad finally pulled over near a patch of gravel on the shoulder, the headlights cutting a harsh white path into the darkness. He put the car in park but kept the engine running. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Brad, why are we here?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He exhaled sharply, like he'd been holding something in for too long. "Mom, this has gotten out of hand. You're making everything difficult. Heather and I can't keep living in chaos because you refuse to accept help." "Chaos?" I repeated, stunned. "I've done everything for you. I've supported you, that's the problem," he snapped, finally turning to look at me. His eyes were cold, almost empty. "You're stuck. You're clinging to a life that's gone. The house, the routines, the old way of doing things, it's over. And you're dragging us down with you." Those words sliced through me. "I'm not dragging anyone down," I said, gripping my coat with trembling fingers. "I just want to stay in my home." "Well, you can't." His voice rose, sharp and final. "Heather and I talked. We're taking over the house. You'll move into an apartment closer to us. Somewhere we can manage your needs." "My needs?" The words scraped out of my throat. I didn't agree to that. Brad opened his door. "Doesn't matter. It's done." Before I could react, he came around to my side, yanked the passenger door open, and pulled me out. My feet slipped on the gravel, sending a flash of pain up my legs as I hit the ground. He tossed my handbag beside me. "You're done," he said, voice flat and unforgiving. "Don't call me. We'll send whatever you need." The door slammed. The car accelerated. The red taillights streaked away until they vanished entirely. And just like that, I was alone on the side of the road. Bleeding. Shaking. Unwanted. Everything I thought I knew about my son shattered in the cold night air. The world blurred in and out around me. I don't remember how long I lay there, minutes, maybe longer, but the cold seeped through my coat and into my bones. My ears rang. My breath caught in uneven bursts. I tried to push myself up once, then again, but my arms shook too hard to hold me. A distant engine rumbled somewhere down the road. For a moment, panic shot through me. Was Brad coming back? Had he forgotten something? But the sound grew louder, steadier, and then the unmistakable flicker of red and blue lights washed across the field. A police cruiser slowed, then stopped a few feet from where I lay. The headlights dipped as the car settled. The driver's door opened fast. Two officers stepped out, Officer Ryan Holt, tall with a tired face, and Officer Denise Sullivan, brisk and focused. They jogged toward me, gravel crunching under their boots. "Ma'am," Officer Sullivan said, crouching beside me, "don't try to move." "Are you hurt? Can you hear me?" I'm fine," I lied automatically, the instinct of a mother who has spent decades minimizing her own pain. Officer Holt shone his flashlight over the scattered contents of my handbag. "Looks like you took a fall. What happened here?" I swallowed hard. My throat felt raw. "My son, he left." Both officers exchanged a look, quick, sharp, concerned. Officer Sullivan's tone softened. "Ma'am, our dashcam caught part of the incident. Someone reported a car stopped on the shoulder. We saw what happened when we pulled up." My breath hitched. "You saw?" She nodded. "We have the footage. You're safe now." Safe. The word landed strange and unfamiliar in my ears. They helped me to my feet, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and guided me toward the cruiser. And as I sank into the back seat, trembling under the weight of everything I had just lost, a small thought flickered, weak but alive. If they saw what he did, maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe I'm not alone. The hospital lights were too bright, sharp, almost accusatory, when the officers guided me inside. A nurse settled me into a small exam room, wrapped a warm blanket around my shoulders, and handed me a cup of water. The kindness should have soothed me, but all I felt was hollow. Like someone had scooped out the center of my chest and left only the shell. A doctor checked my bruises, pressed gently against my ribs, asked if I'd hit my head. I answered every question with the same instinctive phrase, "I'm fine." Really, I'm fine. People like me say that even when our bodies are screaming the opposite. When the doctor stepped out, a hospital social worker walked in, Ms. Lynn Mercer, soft-spoken but with the kind of eyes that see more than you want them to. She sat down on a rolling stool and didn't speak right away. She just studied me for a moment. "Ms. Jenkins," she began gently, "the officers filed an incident report. They mentioned the dashcam recorded your son pushing you out of the car. That's considered potential elder abuse." Elder abuse. The words felt too heavy, too dramatic. They didn't fit me. They didn't fit Brad. They didn't fit the story I had spent years telling myself about our family. "Oh, no," I said quickly. "Brad he lost his temper. He didn't mean," she raised a hand softly. "I'm not here to judge him. I'm here to make sure you're safe. What happened tonight wasn't normal. And it wasn't your fault." Fault. I looked down at my scraped palms, at the faint tremble running through them. For the first time, something shifted. Not anger. Not clarity. Just a small crack in the wall I'd built around Brad's behavior. A voice inside me, quiet but honest, whispered, "Maybe this isn't something I can explain away anymore." Ms. Mercer handed me a pamphlet about support resources. I held it in my lap, staring at the cover long after she left. Later, when the nurse cleared me to go home, she pressed the paper into my hands again. This time, I didn't refuse it. By the next morning, the house felt too quiet. I moved slowly, every bruise reminding me of the night before. I didn't want to think. I didn't want to remember. I just wanted to sit in my kitchen with a cup of tea and pretend my life hadn't fallen apart on the side of a road. But pretending had lost its comfort. I had barely settled into my chair when a soft knock came at the back door. I opened it to find Barbara Tate, my neighbor of nearly 20 years, standing there with a container of oatmeal and worry etched deep into her forehead. "I saw the police lights last night," she said quietly. "Is everything all right?" I tried to smile, but it wavered. "I'm fine, Barbara. Just a misunderstanding." She stepped inside without waiting for permission, setting the container on the counter. Claudia, please. Don't do that. Don't shrink it down. Her voice wasn't pushy. It was steady, firm, the way a hand feels when it cups around yours during prayer. She took a breath. I've noticed things. For a long while now. I blinked. What things? Barbara looked toward the window facing my driveway. The way Brad talks to you when he thinks no one's listening. The way Heather walks through your house like she's measuring it. And the other night, I saw him come get you. You looked scared, Claudia. Really scared. My throat tightened. No one had said that out loud. Not even me. I didn't want to meddle, she continued, her voice trembling slightly. But this doesn't feel right. And what happened last night, that wasn't an accident. That was deliberate. Hearing someone else name the truth cracked something open inside me. A deeper truth. A heavier truth. For the first time since the roadside, I felt my shame loosen its grip. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't alone. After Barbara left, I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, her words echoing through the quiet house. Deliberate. She had said it so plainly. So confidently. It made something inside me shift, like a floorboard finally settling after years of strain. I needed air. Space. Something to hold on to that wasn't fear or confusion. So I went to the bedroom I shared with my husband for 3 decades, still neatly kept, still holding the scent of cedar and old paper. In the back of the closet, behind a stack of folded quilts, sat a small wooden file box. My husband kept it there, always locked, always organized. I hadn't opened it since his funeral. My hands trembled as I turned the little brass key still hanging from my necklace. The lock clicked open with a soft metallic sigh. Inside were neatly labeled folders, a small notebook filled with my husband's handwriting, and, at the bottom, a sealed envelope with my name on it. Claudia written in the same careful script he used in every birthday card. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the top folder. There it was. His will. The real one. Not the updated version Brad had spoken about. Not the imaginary convenience Heather had suggested. The wording was clear, the house remained mine for life. Savings accounts split for the grandchildren's future. Brad included, yes, but with boundaries and checks my husband believed were important. My eyes blurred as I read. Then I opened the envelope. It was a letter. Tender. Honest. A warning wrapped in love. He wrote that he worried Brad felt entitled. That grief could warp ambition. That I should keep control of the house no matter what. By the time I reached the last line, my tears had dried on my cheeks. I finally knew, Brad wasn't acting out of care. He was acting out of hunger. And I had just found the truth he'd been hoping I'd never see. The next morning, the letter from my husband still lay on the kitchen table, its edges soft from how many times I had run my fingers over it. I didn't sleep much, but the exhaustion felt different now, less like defeat, more like a slow awakening. I kept thinking about Barbara's words. About the bank papers. About the police footage. And about the way Brad's voice sounded when he said, "You're done." By mid-morning, I found myself dialing a number Barbara had scribbled on a sticky note, Attorney Sonia Davis, someone she trusted from a probate workshop at the community center. My voice shook as I made the appointment. When I arrived, Miss Davis greeted me with a calm smile. She was younger than I expected, with sharp, attentive eyes that missed nothing. Her office was small, quiet, lined with folders but not cluttered. It already felt safer than my own home. "Tell me what brings you in today," she said gently. I took a breath and began to talk. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But piece by piece, I laid out the story, the bank visit, the fundraiser announcement, the roadside. Her expression never wavered. She didn't interrupt. She didn't doubt. She simply listened like every word mattered. When I finished, she pulled out a legal pad. "Claudia, what you're describing raises several concerns. undue influence, coerced signatures, and potential financial exploitation. And the incident on the road, that's more serious than you're allowing yourself to admit. I swallowed. I just don't want to hurt him. She paused. You're not hurting him. You're protecting yourself. Those words settled into me like warm tea. Miss Davis asked for any documents I had. I gave her the will, the letter, the copies from the bank. She reviewed them carefully, her pen tapping lightly. Good, she said at last. You have more power here than you think. And you're not alone in this. It was the first time in weeks I felt the slightest rise inside me, not confidence, not yet, but the faintest spark of strength. When I got home from Ms. Davis's office, the house felt different. Not safer, not yet, but less suffocating. Like I'd opened a window somewhere inside myself and let in a small breath of clarity. I set my purse down, made a cup of tea I barely drank, and looked around my living room with new eyes. Everything Heather had boxed up, every frame she had turned face down, every suggestion Brad made about modernizing, none of it felt random anymore. It was part of a pattern. A plan. Ms. Davis had told me, start gathering anything that shows pressure, changes you didn't understand, or decisions made without your consent. So I did. I began with the hallway cabinet. Old bank statements, utility bills, and copies of letters were all there, neatly filed the way my husband taught me. I made a folder labeled house and placed every relevant paper inside. My hands shook, but not from fear this time, from purpose. Next, I dug through my phone. Texts from Brad telling me to just sign, ones where Heather wrote, "Don't overthink it, Brad knows what's best," and the reminder texts about appointments I never asked them to control. I screenshotted everything and emailed it to myself, just like Ms. Davis advised. In the closet, tucked in an old purse, I found the carbon copy of the bank document I'd signed. Seeing my signature, shaky and rushed, made my stomach twist. But I put it in the folder anyway. Finally, I took an old spiral notebook, its cover faded from years of grocery lists, and opened to a fresh page. I wrote the date at the top. Then I wrote everything I remembered, times, words, small moments. Not perfect, but honest. A record of the truth. When I finished, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across my floor. For the first time in a long while, I didn't shrink from them. I was starting to see clearly. Starting to reclaim something I didn't even realize I had lost. My voice. 2 days passed without a word from Brad. I thought the silence might continue, but just before dusk on the third evening, his car rolled into my driveway. No warning. No text. The same way he always arrived when he wanted control. I met him at the door, my hand resting lightly on the knob, not opening it all the way. "Mom," he said softly, a tone I hadn't heard from him since he was a teenager trying to talk his way out of trouble. He held a bouquet of grocery store flowers, bright, cheap, and already wilting around the edges. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside. Barely. He stood in the living room, eyes scanning the boxes Heather had left stacked by the wall. "I'm sorry," he began, lowering his voice as if sincerity could be borrowed with volume. "The other night, I shouldn't have lost my temper. I was stressed. Work's been crazy. The kids need things. Heather's overwhelmed. I just snapped." I watched him carefully. His apology didn't settle into the room, it floated above us like mist, thin and insubstantial. "I didn't mean to scare you," he continued. "Let's fix this. I brought new paperwork that clears up the confusion. It'll make everything easier if you sign it." He reached into his coat and pulled out folded documents. Legal-sized. Crisp. Ready. A part of me, the old part, nearly took them out of habit, out of guilt, out of the same instinct that always told me don't upset him. But then I remembered Ms. Davis's words. I remembered Barbara's voice. I remembered the gravel beneath my palms. So I did something small, but monumental. I smiled gently and said, "I'll need time to read those." Brad blinked, thrown off balance. "Mom, it's simple, I'll read them," I repeated, my voice steady, "when my attorney is present." Attorney. The word hung between us like a wall he hadn't expected. He froze just for a second, but it was enough. His power slipped. He didn't leave angry. He left calculating. And when he came back days later with court papers, I understood this hadn't been a reaction. It had already been waiting in a folder somewhere. And I felt the first true shift inside me, not fear. Not confusion. Something stronger. Strategy. I expected Brad to push back after I mentioned an attorney, but I didn't expect how quickly he would strike. 2 mornings later, a letter arrived, thick, stiff, and stamped with the name of a discount law office on the corner of Maple and 3rd. My stomach tightened as I opened it. The words blurred at first, but the meaning was unmistakable. Brad was petitioning the court for temporary guardianship over me. The letter claimed I was mentally declining, unable to manage household decisions, and at risk if left unsupervised. It even implied I fabricated the roadside incident due to confusion. Reading it felt like standing on a cliff edge, the ground crumbling beneath me. My knees went weak. He didn't just want the house. He wanted control of me. I called Ms. Davis immediately. My hands shook so badly I had to hold the phone with both of them. Within an hour, I was in her office with the letter spread across her desk. She scanned it once, then again, slower, jaw tightening. "He's overplayed his hand," she said. "This is exactly the kind of escalation courts look at when determining undue influence." Then she reached for a folder. "We have something he doesn't think you'll use." Inside was the police incident report and a USB drive. "The dashcam footage," she said. My breath caught. "You have it?" She nodded. "Officer Sullivan sent it over. They logged everything." She inserted the drive. The screen lit up. There was Brad's car, pulled over on that dark road. There was the door opening. There was his hand, pushing me out. Then his voice, cold as winter, "You're done." My heart pounded, not from fear this time, but from clarity. Brad had set a trap. But he had walked into a bigger one. And for the first time, I realized I might actually win this. 2 days after watching the dashcam footage, I walked back into the bank, this time with my spine straighter, my folder organized, and a quiet resolve settling deep in my chest. Ms. Davis had written a formal request for records, and I carried it in an envelope tucked tightly under my arm. Ms. Hannah Park looked up from her desk the moment I entered. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by something softer, concern, maybe even guilt. "Ms. Jenkins," she said gently, standing. "Are you all right?" "I saw the police came by last night." "They did," I replied. "I'm working with an attorney now. I need some information." She motioned for me to sit. Her hands folded carefully on the desk, as if bracing herself. "What can I help you with?" I passed her the envelope. "My attorney needs copies of everything from the day I signed the forms with Brad. And anything that shows how the transaction was handled." She read the letter quickly, eyes narrowing slightly, not in judgment, but in understanding. Then she exhaled. "I was worried that day," she admitted quietly. "You seemed unsure. And your son was insistent." She chose her words with care. "I wasn't allowed to interfere unless you asked directly, but I made notes after you left. I'll print everything we have." Her words settled like a steady hand on my shoulder. She moved efficiently, printing documents, retrieving signatures, reviewing timestamps. When she returned, she placed a stack of papers in front of me. "These records show who authorized the lien and account access documents," she said. "Anne." "Ms. Jenkins? If your attorney needs a statement from me, I'll provide one." For a moment, I just stared at her, throat tight. Another person who believed me. Another piece of truth. I wasn't invisible anymore. And Brad was running out of shadows to hide in. I didn't plan to speak to Pastor Charles. I only walked to the church that morning because I needed quiet, some place that didn't echo with Brad's voice or Heather's footsteps. But when I stepped inside, I found him arranging hymnals near the front pews. He turned, surprised, then smiled the soft, familiar way he always had. "Claudia," he said warmly. "I've been thinking about you. How are you holding up?" The question, simple as it was, felt like an invitation I hadn't been given in months. I sat down slowly. He joined me. "Pastor," I began, my voice trembling before I could steady it, "something's happening with Brad. And I don't know how much you've heard, but the truth isn't what people think." He listened the way only a pastor can, full presence, no interruption. I told him about the fundraiser, the bank, the night on the road. I didn't embellish or exaggerate. I simply laid out the facts like stones I'd been carrying too long. His expression shifted from concern to something heavier, guilt, maybe grief. "Claudia," he said finally, when I thanked Brad and Heather publicly. I was repeating what they told me. I didn't know. If I had understood, I never would have put your name or your property in the middle of it. I nodded, swallowing the embarrassment that still clung to that memory. "I'm working with an attorney now," I said softly. "I'm taking steps to protect myself." He straightened, voice firm. "Good. And if your attorney needs a statement about what happened at the fundraiser, or how they presented the situation to the church, I will give it." I stared at him, stunned. Another truth teller. Another witness stepping into the light. For the first time, the story Brad had crafted so carefully began to crack at its edges. The community he relied on for admiration was starting to see behind the curtain. I wasn't expecting a knock that afternoon. I had just finished sorting the last of my documents when I heard soft tapping, too light to be Brad, too hesitant to be Heather. When I opened the door, Kayla and Logan stood there, backpacks slung over their shoulders, eyes uncertain. "Grandma," Logan whispered, "can we come in?" I stepped aside, heart twisting. "Of course, baby. Come in." They settled on the couch, their small bodies close together. Kayla held her phone tightly, thumbs pressing at the edges like she was trying to keep something inside. "Dad said you might move soon," she said, her voice flat in that way only hurting teenagers manage. "He said you need help and that things are getting complicated." Complicated. That's how Brad explained betrayal to his children. I sat beside them, hands folded in my lap. "I'm not moving anywhere right now," I said gently. "But grown-ups are going through something difficult. None of this is your fault." Kayla nodded, jaw trembling. Then, without a word, she unlocked her phone and turned the screen toward me. It was a text thread, Heather complaining to someone I didn't recognize. "Dealing with her drama is exhausting. Once everything's settled, this will all be easier. Brad has to stay firm. She won't let go unless we push." My chest tightened. Not just at the words, but at what it meant for Kayla to show me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know she's my mom, but this isn't right." I placed my hand over hers. "Thank you for trusting me with that." Logan leaned against my arm, small and warm. "Grandma, are you mad at Daddy?" I looked down at him, my heart breaking at the innocence in his eyes. "I'm not mad at you," I said softly. "And I'm not mad at your sister. The adults, we have things we need to fix. But I love you both. That never changes." They stayed for an hour. We didn't talk about the case again. We colored. We laughed a little. We sat in silence. But when they left, the house felt heavier, not because of the trouble ahead, but because of the truth. Revenge was necessary. But innocence would still pay a price. The next morning, I sat in Ms. Davis's office again, the folder of evidence resting between us like a final, undeniable truth. She scanned each document with calm precision, occasionally underlining a date or circling a signature. When she finished, she folded her hands on the desk. "Claudia," she said, "we have enough to move forward. More than enough." Those words made my breath catch. Move forward. Not hide. Not endure. Not wait for Brad's next decision. Forward. She laid out the plan carefully, making sure I understood every step. First, she prepared a petition to void the property transfers Brad had coerced. Then a request for a protective order citing the dashcam footage and the escalating pressure. Each form she filled out felt like placing a brick back into the foundation of my life. As she typed, she glanced at me. I'm also sending the incident report and financial documents to the district attorney's office. What he did wasn't just manipulative, it may be criminal. They need to review it. My hands tightened in my lap. Criminal? The word felt too heavy, too final. I didn't want jail. You didn't choose this path, she said gently. He did. She slid the completed forms toward me. Sign here. This starts the civil case. And it protects your home while the investigation proceeds. I picked up the pen. My signature shook, but not from fear, this time from the weight of reclaiming something I had almost lost forever. When we walked into the courthouse to file the documents, the clerk stamped them with a heavy thud that echoed in my chest. It was the sound of a line being drawn. Brad had taken control for months. But now, for the first time, I was taking control back. The court papers hadn't even settled in my mailbox before Brad showed up. I heard his car before I saw it, tires crunching angrily on the gravel, a car door slamming with enough force to make my windows tremble. I stood just inside the living room, breathing slowly, my hand resting on the edge of the table for balance. Then came the pounding. Not a knock. A demand. Mom. Open the door. I didn't move. I didn't owe him haste. After a long moment, I opened the door just wide enough to show my face. Barbara stood quietly behind me, her idea, not mine. Just in case, she'd whispered earlier. Brad took one look at her and sneered. Oh, great. The neighborhood watchdog. Barbara didn't flinch. He turned back to me. What is this? He snapped, waving the court notice in the air. You filed against me? For what? Protecting you? My voice was calm, surprisingly so. I filed to protect myself, Brad. That's all. He stepped forward, but I didn't back up. You're being manipulated, he said sharply. That lawyer is filling your head with nonsense. Undo it. Today. Brad, I said softly, I have every right to get legal help. He laughed bitterly. Legal help? A protective order? Against me? You're humiliating this family. My hands trembled, but I kept them at my sides. If you want to talk, we can schedule a meeting, with Ms. Davis present. Otherwise, this conversation is over. The color drained from his face, replaced by a cold fury I had never seen in my son. You're making a mistake you can't take back, he hissed. You want a fight? Fine. You'll get one. He turned and stormed down the steps. But as he drove away, spraying gravel behind him, I didn't crumble. I closed the door, exhaled slowly, and realized something powerful. The fear that once held me in place was finally breaking. And Brad knew it. That was why his hands were shaking, not mine. I should have expected retaliation. Brad had never handled losing control well, not as a child, not as a man. But when the knock came the following afternoon, I wasn't prepared for the badge clipped to the visitor's shirt or the clipboard tucked under her arm. Miss Jenkins, the woman asked gently. My name is Miss Danielle Donnelly. I'm with Adult Protective Services. We received a report about potential self-neglect and unsafe living conditions. I need to do a wellness check. For a moment, the world tilted. Self-neglect? Unsafe? Brad had filed a complaint against me. I steadied myself. Of course, I said quietly. Please come in. Barbara, who had stopped by minutes earlier with a plate of muffins, looked up from the kitchen with sharp understanding. She stayed close, offering silent support. Ms. Donnelly walked through the house slowly, medication neatly organized in a labeled pillbox. Refrigerator stocked with fresh groceries. Bills stacked by due date on the counter. Floors clean, hazard-free. A working smoke detector beeping faintly from a low battery. Everything in order. Everything normal, because I had always taken care of myself. She took notes, nodding with each observation. Your home is well kept, Ms. Jenkins. Do you feel safe living here? I met her eyes. Yes. I feel unsafe with someone else trying to take my home. Barbara added, her son is angry about a legal case. This feels retaliatory. Ms. Donnelly's pen paused. That aligns with what I'm seeing. Before leaving, she handed me her card. If he makes more false reports or tries to intimidate you, please call me. We take that seriously. When the door closed behind her, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Brad's attack had failed. And instead of undermining me, he had given me another witness, another thread of truth weaving itself into my case. He thought he was cornering me. But the walls were closing in on him instead. A week passed without a word from Brad or Heather. The silence didn't comfort me this time, it felt strategic, like the stillness before a storm. I stayed busy preparing documents with Ms. Davis, updating my journal, and keeping the house in careful order. Every step made me feel sturdier, more rooted. But deep down, I knew they weren't finished. The call came late one afternoon. Claudia, a man's voice said, flat and professional. This is Mr. Merritt, counsel for Brad Jenkins. I'm calling regarding a possible family settlement. I closed my eyes. Of course. He continued, my client is prepared to offer a monthly stipend for your living expenses, provided you sign over partial control of the property. This will avoid unnecessary conflict, and it ensures everyone's interests are protected. Protected. They always framed my erasure as protection. I'm not interested, I said quietly. He pressed on. Ms. Jenkins, this is a generous proposal considering your current instability. My fingers tightened around the phone. Sir, I am fully capable of managing my own life. Well, he said, impatience creeping in, without cooperation, this situation could become adversarial. It already is, I replied. Silence. Then he sighed. Think it over. Brad would prefer to avoid court. I'll discuss it with my attorney, I said, deliberately emphasizing the last word. I hung up and immediately called Ms. Davis. After I explained, she didn't hesitate. That was a pressure tactic, she said. Do not engage further. If they want mediation, we'll set terms. On our schedule, not theirs. When I ended the call, I felt something unfamiliar settle over me, calm, steady, unshakable. Brad no longer frightened me. He was negotiating from fear, not strength. And he wasn't used to me holding the pen. The court date approached faster than I expected. One morning, I woke before sunrise with a tightness in my chest, not fear exactly, but the weight of knowing the next steps would be public. Real. Final. I moved through the house slowly, touching the back of chairs, the edges of picture frames, the kitchen counter I'd wiped 1,000 times. This was still my home. And soon, a judge would see the truth behind how close I came to losing it. Ms. Davis arrived just after 9, carrying a slim briefcase and her usual calm. She spread everything across my dining table, Barbara's written statement. Miss Park's report about the bank visit. Officer Sullivan's incident summary. Screenshots of Brad's texts. A transcript of the false adult protective report. And the USB with the dashcam footage. Each piece felt like a brick laid in a wall I never thought I'd have the strength to build. When we present this, she said, tapping the top folder, the judge will understand the pattern. Not just one incident. A series of actions aimed at control. I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. We're something comfortable, she added gently. Something that makes you feel like yourself. After she left, I walked into my bedroom and chose a simple navy dress, nothing fancy, nothing meant to impress. Just something honest. Then I slipped my husband's letter into my purse. Not to show the court, but to remind myself who I was before fear took root. As evening settled, I stood outside on the porch, feeling the cool air wrap around me. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car passed. And I realized something, tomorrow wouldn't just expose Brad. It would reveal me too, steady, standing, unbroken. I closed my eyes and whispered, let the truth speak. The courthouse smelled faintly of old carpet and coffee, an odd mixture that hit me the moment I stepped through the metal detector. I held my purse tightly against my side, feeling the shape of my husband's letter through the fabric like a heartbeat I could lean on. Ms. Davis walked beside me, calm and steady, her briefcase swinging lightly at her side as if we were heading into a meeting rather than a battle. "Take your time," she murmured as we approached the courtroom doors. "No rush." But my legs were already heavy. Each step felt like walking through memory, through the funeral, the bank, the night on the road. All the places where my voice had gone quiet. Not today. Inside, the room buzzed with a low murmur. I hadn't expected so many people. A few neighbors sat on the benches, whispering softly. Pastor Charles nodded at me in quiet encouragement. Even Mrs. Donnelly from APS sat near the back, clipboard on her lap, as if silently confirming she stood with the truth. Then I saw Brad. He sat at the table to the right, wearing a navy suit and an expression that wavered between confidence and panic. Heather sat beside him, rigid and polished, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles blanched. Their lawyer adjusted papers, avoiding eye contact. For a moment, I didn't recognize my son. Not the boy who used to bring me Mother's Day cards drawn in crayon. Not the teenager who cried when he didn't make the basketball team. This man was someone else entirely, someone who believed he deserved control over my life. Miss Davis guided me to our table. I sat, smoothed my dress, and tried to match my breathing to the slow tick of the courtroom clock. Then Judge Janice Prescott entered, stern, composed, and carrying the kind of authority that hushed the entire room into silence. "All rise," the bailiff called. And as I stood, I felt the moment settle over me. This was the place where truth would finally stand up too. When the judge called Brad to the stand, he straightened his suit jacket like a man preparing for a photo, not a testimony. He walked with rehearsed confidence, shoulders back, chin lifted. Heather watched him with the rigid admiration of someone who had coached every word. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore in, and settled into the witness chair with a careful sigh, the kind meant to suggest exhaustion, concern, responsibility. "Mr. Jenkins," Judge Prescott began, "please explain your petition for guardianship." Brad nodded, lips pressing into a sorrowful line. "Your Honor," he said, voice soft, almost trembling, "this has been incredibly hard. My mother has been declining for a while. Forgetting appointments. Leaving the stove on. Getting confused about bills. I've been doing everything I can to support her." I felt a coldness rise inside me. I had never left the stove on. Not once. He continued, gesturing delicately, as though placing his words on velvet. "She's always been independent, and I respect that. But lately, she's been signing things she doesn't understand. Making impulsive decisions. Wandering out alone late at night." Late at night, he meant the night he pushed me out of the car. Heather dabbed her eyes at the perfect moment, as if cued. "My wife and I only want her safe," he said. "We've offered to let her live with us, but she refuses. And when we try to help with her finances, she becomes agitated." He lowered his voice, adding, "We never wanted court involvement. But we're scared. Truly." His words were smooth. Polished. Crafted to perfection. And for a brief moment, I saw some heads in the gallery nod. People who didn't know the truth. People who believed the image he'd spent months constructing. My stomach twisted, not from doubt, but from the painful understanding of how easily a lie can dress itself as love. But Ms. Davis leaned slightly toward me, her voice barely a whisper. "Let him talk," she murmured. Every word digs his hole deeper. And I breathed. Slow. Steady. Because I knew what was coming. And Brad had no idea how close he was to being unmasked. When Judge Prescott asked for the next witness, Ms. Davis rose smoothly. "Your Honor, we call Barbara Tate to the stand." Barbara walked forward with her shoulders squared, the quiet dignity of someone who didn't want to fight, but wouldn't run from the truth. She took the oath, sat down, and folded her hands in her lap. "Miss Tate," Ms. Davis began, "how long have you known Ms. Jenkins?" "Nearly 20 years, Barbara replied. "Long enough to know she's careful, organized, and capable." Brad shifted in his seat. And have you observed anything relevant to this case? Barbara inhaled slowly. Yes. I've seen Brad and Heather treating her, dismissively. Like she didn't know her own mind. I heard them discussing flipping the house months before Claudia knew anything about it. She glanced at me briefly, her voice tightening. And the night he took her on that drive. Claudia looked frightened. Very frightened. A murmur moved through the gallery. Brad's lawyer tried to rattle her, questioning her memory, her perspective, but Barbara didn't flinch. She answered calmly, plainly, without embellishment. Her steadiness was a blade, quiet, precise, cutting through Brad's performance. Then Ms. Davis called Ms. Hannah Park. The bank clerk walked up with her hair neatly pinned, professionalism radiating from her posture. After she was sworn in, Ms. Davis asked, "Can you describe what you observed during the transaction involving Ms. Jenkins and her son?" Ms. Park nodded. Ms. Jenkins seemed unsure about what she was signing. She asked questions, but her son answered for her. I remember being concerned. I even made notes after they left. Brad's face paled. And would you provide those notes to the court? Yes, ma'am. She handed the documents to Judge Prescott, who read them quietly, her expression sharpening ever so slightly. In that moment, the balance in the room shifted. The truth had begun to take shape, solid, undeniable. And Brad's carefully crafted story was finally starting to crack. When Ms. Davis rose again, a quiet ripple moved through the courtroom, something instinctive, like people sensing a shift in weather. She carried a small USB drive in her hand. I recognized it instantly. My heart thudded, slow and heavy. Your Honor, she said calmly, we request permission to enter the police dashcam footage as evidence. Judge Prescott adjusted her glasses. Proceed. The bailiff wheeled over a monitor. The cables tangled at first. The volume needed adjusting. The screen flickered twice before settling. Each small delay stretched the moment, tightening the air until it felt almost electric. Brad shifted in his seat. Heather's hand clamped onto his wrist. Finally, the screen brightened. At first, it showed nothing but a dark stretch of road, headlights cutting through the black. Then, a car pulled to the shoulder. Brad's car. The audio kicked in, a click, a door opening, the hum of the engine. Then the moment. Brad stepping out. Brad yanking the passenger door open. Brad leaning in. And then, me. Falling. Hands scraping gravel. My body hitting the ground with a sound I will never forget. Gasps filled the courtroom, sharp, breathy sounds that echoed against the walls. Then came his voice, clear and cold, "You're done." Judge Prescott's face didn't move, but her eyes hardened. The gallery went silent, no whispers, no coughs, nothing but the faint hum of the monitor. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence deepened. Brad's lawyer opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Judge Prescott leaned forward, her tone measured but icy. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, "explain this." Brad didn't move. In that suspended moment, before he could lie, before he could breathe, before he could rebuild the mask, the truth stood exposed, undeniable and devastating. And the courtroom was no longer on his side. When Judge Prescott called my name, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I walked to the stand slowly, each step marked by the soft tap of my shoes against the polished floor. The bailiff held out the Bible. My hand shook as I placed it on the cover, but my voice didn't falter when I swore to tell the truth. Truth. I had spent months swallowing it, hiding it, folding it small enough to survive inside my chest. Now it had room to breathe. I settled into the witness chair. The microphone sat too close, so I nudged it away with trembling fingers. "Ms. Jenkins," Ms. Davis said gently, "can you tell the court, in your own words, what's been happening?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, my heartbeat thudding against my ribs. But then I saw something, not Brad, not Heather, not the crowded room. I saw my husband's handwriting in my purse. I saw Barbara's worried face the night she found me. I saw myself lying on the road, gravel biting into my palms. And I began. I told them everything. Not dramatically. Not with anger. Just plainly. About the bank visit I didn't understand. About the fundraiser where my voice was smothered. About the boxes of memories Heather packed away without asking. About the pressure. The guilt. The slow, steady erasure of my place in my own life. When I reached the part about the night drive, the room grew impossibly still. I didn't describe the fall, I didn't have to. They had seen it. But I described how it felt. Something inside me broke, I said quietly. Not because he pushed me, but because he didn't come back. My eyes didn't leave the judge. I wasn't speaking to Brad anymore. I'm not confused, I said. I'm not declining. I'm not unsafe alone. I was unsafe with him. The last word hung in the air, solid, steady, unshakable. And for the first time in months, I felt whole. Judge Prescott took a long moment before she spoke, flipping slowly through the pages in front of her. Each turn of paper felt like a drumbeat in my chest. The courtroom was silent, so silent I could hear Heather's uneven breathing from across the aisle. Brad sat stiff, jaw clenched, his earlier confidence dissolved into a tight, restless panic. Finally, the judge looked up. Having reviewed the evidence, she began, her voice steady as stone. This court finds substantial proof of undue influence, coercion, and attempts to manipulate Ms. Jenkins' financial and personal autonomy. Brad's shoulders tensed. Heather's hand slipped from his arm. Judge Prescott continued, her tone firm but controlled. The lien and loan documents signed at the bank are voided, effective immediately. Full authority and ownership remain with Ms. Claudia Jenkins. Further, the petition for guardianship is denied. The words hit the air with the weight of truth finally restored. But the judge wasn't finished. This court also issues a protective order. Mr. Jenkins is prohibited from contacting or approaching Ms. Jenkins outside of legal proceedings. Any violation will result in immediate consequences. Brad exhaled sharply, almost a scoff, but the judge's gaze pinned him in place. And one more matter, she said, leaning forward slightly. The court is forwarding the dashcam footage, the bank records, and the APS findings to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges, including elder abuse, fraud, and assault. A collective breath rippled through the gallery. Brad blinked hard. His expression cracked open, revealing something raw and frightened beneath the arrogance. This ruling is final, Judge Prescott concluded. Court is adjourned. Her gavel struck once, sharp, echoing through the room. It wasn't just a ruling. It was a restoration. And in that moment, with everyone rising around me, I felt a calm settle into my bones, a calm I hadn't known in years. Word traveled quickly, faster than I expected, faster than I wanted. By Sunday morning, even people I hadn't spoken to in years were whispering in the church foyer before service. I walked in slowly, unsure of how I'd be received. Pastor Charles stood near the pulpit adjusting his microphone. When he saw me, his expression softened into something that looked like apology and respect woven together. He cleared his throat as he stepped onto the platform. Before we begin, he said, addressing the congregation, I want to correct something I spoke about weeks ago. I praised Brad and Heather for financial generosity that, as we now know, was misrepresented. Ms. Claudia Jenkins has always been the rightful owner of her home, and she has faced challenges with great courage and dignity. A quiet murmur moved through the crowd. I felt dozens of eyes on me, some sympathetic, some ashamed, some simply wide with disbelief. I kept my gaze forward, hands folded. During the fellowship hour afterward, people approached me carefully. I'm so sorry, Claudia, one woman whispered. We didn't know. Another touched my arm gently. If you ever need anything, rides, errands, please ask. Their kindness was soft, awkward, imperfect, but real. Meanwhile, Brad and Heather slipped into the back of the sanctuary near the end of service. They didn't speak to anyone. No one approached them. Even the people who once hung on Brad's every word seemed to step aside, giving them a wide berth. When they left, it was hurried, heads down, eyes averted, like they couldn't bear the weight of what the community now understood. Reputation can be rebuilt with truth or destroyed with it. Brad's had finally met the truth. And it was heavier than he ever expected. The week after the hearing felt strangely quiet, as if the house itself were catching its breath. I spent my days tending the garden, reorganizing shelves, and trying to settle into a life that no longer braced for Brad's footsteps. But underneath that calm was an ache, a soft, persistent, shaped like two young faces I missed more than I dared admit. One afternoon, I heard a hesitant knock. When I opened the door, Kayla and Logan stood there, backpacks slouched, eyes uncertain. Behind them, a car idled in the street. I recognized it, one of Heather's friends, tasked with drop-off duty now that Brad wasn't allowed near the house without legal oversight. "Grandma," Logan said, voice small. "Can we stay a while?" "Of course," I murmured, stepping aside. They came in quietly, the way children do when they're trying to carry adult-sized worries. Kayla didn't take off her backpack. She just sat at the edge of the couch, shoulders tight. "Dad's mad," she said softly. "All the time now." I sat beside her. "This isn't your fault." She nodded, but her eyes didn't believe it. Logan climbed into my lap, his voice muffled against my sweater. "Is Daddy going to jail?" My breath caught. The criminal case hadn't resolved yet, but the DA had begun their review. I couldn't lie, but I wouldn't burden them. "Adults face consequences for their choices," I said gently. "But no matter what happens, you two are loved. By me. Always." Kayla blinked fast. We didn't know what to say at school. People were talking. I touched her hand. "You don't have to explain anything. What happens between adults is not your job to fix." They stayed for an hour. We made cocoa. Logan colored. Kayla sat close without speaking. When their ride texted that it was time to go, they hugged me longer than usual. And when the door closed behind them, the house sighed into silence again. Love remained. But the price of truth was still being paid. The days following the hearing slipped into a calm I didn't quite recognize. It wasn't joy, not yet. It wasn't triumph either. It was something quieter, like standing on a shoreline after a storm, watching the waves return to their natural rhythm. I found myself waking earlier, not because of anxiety, but because the house finally felt like mine again. I opened windows, let sunlight spill across the floors Heather once called outdated, and brewed coffee at a pace that belonged to no one but me. Barbara stopped by one morning with fresh tomatoes from her garden. She leaned against the counter, smiling at the open windows, the uncluttered space, the little signs that life was growing again. "You look lighter," she said. I didn't argue. "I feel steadier," I admitted. "Like I'm remembering who I was before everything got complicated." We talked for a while about ordinary things, weather, recipes, the repairs I'd been meaning to make for years. It grounded me, the way normal life often does after chaos. But when she left, the house grew quiet again. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the picture frames still waiting to be rehung. My husband's face smiled gently from the glass, patient as ever. "I'm trying," I whispered to the empty room. "I'm really trying." Later that evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sky shift from blue to gold. I held the letter from my husband, the one he wrote before he died, warning me to stay strong, to trust myself. I read it slowly, letting every word settle deep. He had seen something I didn't. He knew what Brad was capable of before I ever believed it. And now, I was finally living the strength he hoped I would find. The legal battle wasn't over. The criminal investigation still waited. But inside myself, something had already resolved. I had reclaimed my place in my own life. The letter from the district attorney arrived on a warm Friday afternoon. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope resting on the lace placemat I'd owned since my wedding. My hands hesitated before opening it, not out of fear, but from the weight of knowing this was the final turn in a long, painful journey. Inside, the message was clear. The DA was moving forward with charges against Brad, financial exploitation, attempted fraud, and misdemeanor assault. Nothing sensational. Nothing vindictive. Just accountability, the kind he never expected to face. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the same drawer where I kept my husband's will. Not to gloat. Not to revisit. But to keep as proof that truth still mattered. That afternoon, I walked outside to water the garden. The air was warm, carrying the soft hum of cicadas. My roses, once neglected during the chaos, were blooming again. Deep red, bright white, soft pink. Resilient. Barbara waved from her porch. I waved back. No words needed. Later, I sat in my favorite porch chair, the wooden one my husband refinished years ago. I watched cars pass, listened to birds settle in the trees, and felt something I hadn't felt in months: freedom. Not the dramatic kind. Not loud or triumphant. But quiet. Steady. Real. I thought about Brad, not with anger, not with forgiveness, but with distance. A boundary drawn not from spite, but from necessity. Some wounds heal with time. Some heal with truth. And some heal when you finally choose yourself. I took a long breath and let it out slowly. My home, I whispered. My life. My terms. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt whole. If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it. If you have a unique story of your own, share it in the comments below. Thank you for listening.